Hey everyone, welcome back. This is part 2 of Revisiting Christianity. Stay tuned.
Yeah, you know it all. You encircle me before and behind me and laid your hands upon me. Such knowledge.
All right, guys, so as with the last video and future videos, I'm going to try every time before I enter into these churches to do a small little video, let you know where my head's at before I go in. So play those now. Hey, so I'm actually parked in the back side of the building. Well, not the very back, but like the side. I thought the services started at 10, but they don't actually start until 11, even though the website says 10:30. I'm actually really confused, so I'll probably go in around 10:30 and just see what I can see. They're like Sunday school type classes. They don't call it Sunday school, they call it small groups. But they started at like 9, so they should be getting out soon. I can kind of observe and see what's going on. About to read a little bit and pray, and hopefully there's somebody in there that I can help. I don't know if it'll be as straightforward as the last time where I felt the Spirit telling me to go to the front. That was tremendously scary for me last time. But we'll just see what Yahuwah decides, and we'll leave it in his hands. They do have law enforcement at this particular church building. So here's hoping I don't get arrested if something happens. I actually know the pastor of this church. He and I met up at a coffee house. Well, we didn't meet up there. We just happened to go at the same time for like a year straight. So we had quite a few conversations through that year and a half time frame before COVID hit. And I had written him and his wife a letter after everything that he had said to me. About like wanting to do Passover and stuff for his congregation, but he like really couldn't. So I'm hoping that he's the one that is preaching today or going over the lesson today. I'm hoping to see him. If not, then I'm hoping that, like I said, that Yahuwah's will just be done. But it would be nice to see him because I want to see if he remembers me. Even though it's been a few years and, I'm different now. I don't wear makeup. I cover my head, etc. But I bet I could jog his memory. Regardless, it would be nice to talk to him now that I am more learned, and really be able to come up with some answers to those questions that he had asked me where I didn't have an answer when I was first learning. So I'm hoping that he is here today and that I'll have a chance to speak with him as well. It was kind of scary driving up because we haven't been to this place in probably 7 years.
Right.
And we'd only gone once or twice when we were visiting a different, we were going to a different branch of this particular church. And so we'd only visited this location once or twice for like a worship night or something.
Yeah. And if you keep up with our videos, this is one of the churches that brought us back to Torah initially. It's like when we first got together, if you saw our testimonies.
It was a great place to have our eyes opened. It served its purpose, if you will, for a brief moment.
It definitely did. And
then Yahuwah grabbed us and was like, "Hey, this is not how it's supposed to be." So I get out of my car and I go into the church. This is what I call an MMC. It's a mini mega church. Not like a Joel Osteen, but it has several hundred people. So there's lots and lots of people, which, again, if you watched any of my other things, I'm not big on super big crowds anymore. I was when I was a teenager, but not anymore. And so that was a little daunting, particularly because I'm not like any of the people there anymore. Not just spiritually, but also physically, again, with like the head wrap and wearing dresses usually and things of that nature.
Being modest.
Yeah. Anyway, so I walk up to the door, and they have probably 6 or 7 doors with door greeters that open the doors for people. The guy that opened my door kind of looked at me funny, but then it was like almost the wheels in his head were turning, saying like, well, we're non-denominational, so we're supposed to accept everybody. I could kind of see that process, and then he smiled really big, and he was like, hey, welcome, come on in. And I will admit, when I walked through the doors, it was like revisiting an old friend. I just was
Fair enough.
a little nostalgic, it's just like, oh, I remember this, and, but so I go in, and there's a big foyer, or some people say foyers. Apparently I'm fancy, but, anyway, so in the foyer, and they have, couches on the side, and they've got lounge chairs in the middle, and over to the right is a coffee bar. Well, they have free coffee against the wall, but they have like an actual coffee bar with baristas on the side.
Pay
and
as you play, kind of.
Yeah.
The
money changers.
The money changers, yeah.
and like little cafe tables with chairs in front of the coffee shop thing. And then on the other side is their restrooms. I have a small bladder, so I had to use the restroom by the time I got into the church. So I went and used the restroom. As soon as I walked in, there was like this young girl, say probably a teenager, 15, 16, and she was crying, and one of their prayer people was talking to her and helping her dry her tears or whatever. And I wanted to ask, like, what's going on? Can I pray for you? But I thought better, because I was already getting kind of some weird looks in the bathroom. So, because I have my head wrap on, and I also have a backpack. So they're probably like, terrorist, but it was just my Bible bag with all of my pens and stuff. But you never know nowadays, I guess. So I was getting some weird looks in the bathroom. So anyway, when I came out, they also have, in the middle, at the wall of the sanctuary, they have like a guest table, and they have different things on there, like pamphlets about what classes they offer. And It was kind of amusing because I asked for one of those, and we exchanged names. It was an older woman, and she was super sweet. And again, nothing against the people in this church. They're almost always super nice. So they're always, well, not always, but normally super welcoming and things like that. And anyway, she was super pleasant and I was like, hey, can I have one of these? And she was like, sure. Are you going to become a member here? And I was like, probably not. I was like, but I'd be interested in looking at your classes anyway, But there were ones on there that were like, if you want to learn more about Jesus and you like to work out, then come to this Jesus workout class. And
love the distractions.
Another one was glamping for Jesus. So if you like camping, come and glamp with us every weekend until the weather changes or whatever. And there were some married classes, and there was some young like college classes that were listed, like most of them revolving around coffee, coffee and Jesus, which is fine, because like I like drinking coffee while I read the Bible, so nothing against that. But it was just kind of funny to me. I kind of chuckled at some of the classes. So anyway,
I like my Jesus and coffee.
Yeah, so I'm still wondering why I'm here at this point, because all it is bringing up nostalgia for me at this point. And I'm like, man, this is a really hard pull, because we used to go to, like I said, a branch of this particular church, and it's just, like I said, just memories of the nice people that never wanted to get really close to you, but they were nice, and all the things that I'll explain later. But so
probably not.
it'll calm down. So anyway, right next to that, of course, is the door to go into the sanctuary.
Yeah.
And there are people that are supposed to be handing out the papers. So similar to the last church, they have papers that you fill in the blanks normally. This time it wasn't a fill in the blank. It was just kind of like a note card with lines, and you can write whatever notes you want, which is different. I haven't seen that in a while at this particular type of church.
Interesting.
At the MMCs, the mini mega churches. And, but anyway, the ladies that were supposed to be handing them out were heavy in conversation, just laughing and kind of, I don't want to say ignoring people. It's not like they were doing it on purpose, but they were just kind of enthralled with themselves instead of passing it out. And, so I had to kind of interrupt them. I was like, excuse me, can I get one of those? And they're like, oh, we're so sorry. Here you go. And they're like, hope you have a good service. And I was like, thanks. And then, I went in, and it's pretty dark in there. Like, they have the lights on, but not fully. It's not like you're walking around in the daytime. It's more of a dusk, at that point. And as with the last one, I took your advice to sit in the back. So I was trying to get the back row, but there were 2 teenagers that were sitting there. I'd say around like 19, 18. And they ended up being a complete distraction through the whole service. And I kept like looking at them like, will you shut up? Because I'm trying to listen to what this dude is saying.
No clapping.
But they paid
church.
Like no mind to me. They did randomly meow like 3/4 of the way through the service. One of them was like, meow. And I was like, meow. Wow. So they were not paying attention at all to the sermon. It's like they were just there to hang out. But they're teenagers, so it is what it is. Anyway.
So is the music playing right now?
No. So this is way before that started because, again, like in my intro video, I wasn't exactly sure because there were like 3 different times that was stated. I remembered it starting at 10. The sign said 10:30. The website said 11.
Or vice versa or something.
Yeah. And so anyway, I went in. It was probably about 10 minutes to service at this point, maybe 15. And so I'm like, okay, I'll sit on the next row from the back row because there's an open spot there. And there was a lady sitting on the row in front. And before I even sat down, because I also wanted to be, they have a sound system because they have a stage and all the fancy stuff. And so I was like, I want to sit.
And by the way, we'll show a couple of pictures of that throughout the video here just for context. But
yeah, we will as I get in a little bit further in. Anyway, so like I just felt like, because she kind of half turned to look at me, and I was like, is this who I'm here for? Am I not here for the pastor this time? Even though I know him semi-personally a long time ago, like, am I not here for that? I just felt like kind of a pull with her. And sure enough, as soon as I had sat down, she turned around and introduced herself, which is not normally something that happens in these bigger churches. Normally people kind of stay with the people they already know and hang out and talk.
Stay in their cliques.
They might turn around if it's like a couple of them to talk, but there's normally not a single person sitting that would turn around. So she introduced herself, asked if it was my first time there, and I told her, I was like, well, it's my first time in a really long time to be here. We exchanged names, and I commented that her name was a biblical name, and she was like, yeah, it's a family name. So I told her I have a family name also. It's just not necessarily biblical. And but anyway, so as the conversation is going, and I don't remember 100% how the subject got brought up, I could just tell that she didn't really seem like she wanted to be there. And so I remember asking her, how do you feel about the church? How do you feel about this church? And she said, the people are good. And I said, yeah. And she said, I like the pastor fine. And I was like, yeah. And she said, my husband's a door greeter. And I said, oh, okay. So he's working. Well, I didn't meet him,
sure, but
I met a different one. But yeah, he was doing the same job as the guy that had opened the door for me. But I had asked her, well, do you like the church? And she said, I'm not, more or less, I'm not quoting verbatim here, but she said, more or less she's not content to be there because she thinks it's kind of all a big show. And I said, okay, I agree with that. That's one of the reasons why we left, is because it's just a big show. I said, but can you go a little deeper into that? Like, let me ask you, what in your mind could change that for you? Like, what things do you see that are wrong that you wish could be rectified?
Good question.
And she sat for a minute and she was like, that's a really good question. And then she started listing a couple of things off. And she said, some of the faults, this particular church, and I noticed some of the other ones of this branch that's branched out, they're very, very sports focused. And it's like you can't go a week without talking about a sports team, whether it be football or baseball or basketball, depending on the season.
Sure.
It's always focused around sports and sports analogies, just because the world is really into sports.
Fair.
And I was
especially
like,
America.
Yeah. I was like, that's true. And she said, so I would like if they would stop talking so much about sports and just focus on the word. And I said, yeah, that'd be good. She brought up that, again, it was like a show, and it was very concert-esque, particularly for the worship. And I said, I agree with you, because they have a stage, and we'll show some pictures now.
Right.
But they have a stage, they have lights, they have a sound system, they do professional musicians that are up there. They're not just, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with a professional musician. As a matter of fact, it can make the music quite good, as we know, because that was one of the drawing factors to you when we had gone to these churches.
Sure. It was a show. That was my
it was
first.
a concert.
I was like, wow, it
was a Jesus concert.
This is the best concert I've ever seen.
Right. But she said, it's a shame that it feels like that, because they even sometimes use a fog machine, and they turn the lights down or off completely except for the stage, and they have, the shiny lights and stuff.
Got to set the mood, Jen.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Set the mood to worship instead of just worshiping normally.
In spirit and truth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she said something that was very true, particularly of these city churches or larger churches, and that was that she thinks it's unfair that we have such high expectations of our husbands, but half of the women parade around very immodestly showing their bodies.
Yeah.
And she said, that's one thing that I don't particularly like about here, is that particularly in the summertime, women show their bodies, and I get it, you're hot, everybody's hot, but the men wear t-shirts. Could you not wear a t-shirt? And she pointed out, she's like, I'm wearing a long sleeve t-shirt. It's thin, but it's a long sleeve t-shirt, and I'm wearing jeans. But you notice a lot of these women are wearing mini skirts and less than tank tops, and particularly the younger women.
This is the exact conversation that you and I had 10 years ago with the same church.
Yeah. And
wow.
We want to differentiate. There's a difference between members of the church dressing that way and people who haven't been to church or haven't been in a really long time, and they just want to look nice, and they are mistaken about worldly views of niceness versus godly views of niceness. There's a difference between those people and people who are higher up in the church.
Well, and I think what you're alluding to is the folks that would have come in off the street, as Yahusha put, sick.
Yes.
They're sick in spirit.
They need a doctor to be well.
They need direction. They need a doctor. They need some advice.
And they need love and kindness, not judgment.
Exactly.
But particularly hypocrisy. If you're going to allow the leaders' wives to dress a certain way, then you can't point out someone else. So I also had an old coworker who had gone to this location several years ago, and she was wearing... she was talking to me about it, excuse me, when we had left the bigger branch of this one. And she was talking about how she was actually kicked out of this church for wearing something that was immodest, and she had only been going for a couple of weeks to this church. And she pointed out to them in front of everybody, I guess, when they pulled her aside, because she was kind of a loud person. And she was like, why are you pointing me out just because I'm curvier when you're leadership women are wearing the same thing that I am? They just happen to not be as curvy. And it's a good point,
Yeah.
So anyway, so the conversation moved forward, and I guess she started feeling a bit guilty. She said, but I do think that the church serves a purpose, and I do think that and I agreed with her. I was like, I agree. It was a stepping stone for me and my husband. I just wish that the pastors had told us the truth, and then we wouldn't have needed the stepping stone because we would have just walked into the truth.
That's right.
You know, and
well, I think the stepping stone was needed for us. I think it was, and if you guys go back and watch those videos of our testimonies, you can see that it really drew us into wanting to read just by hearing some of the sermons and seeing the concert. In the exact same way. I think it was necessary for us. I think it helped us.
I agree, to a certain extent, because I feel like maybe you shouldn't be gobsmacked with the truth when you walk in, but you also shouldn't be misled.
Oh,
you know, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
know,
agree with
like,
that. Yeah.
keep the awesome music.
Yeah.
Dress a little better. Don't focus on sports. Focus on the word.
Right.
And when you're focusing on the word, don't take things out of context. Is more what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So like keep it open.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That it's a blessing to have all of that. You know.
Depends on who's blessing you.
Right. Anyway, she's backtracking a little bit at this point. She's like, I have seen, we went to this church for a little while and I had to take a break because I see that the church is spiritually dead. Like it's nothing.
Are her words.
That was her words. She said, I see nothing but spiritually dead in here. Like nobody's striving to follow God in any way. I don't feel in here. And like I said, it's a big show. However, so she took a break apparently for like a year and a half from this church. And then they came back. I don't know if her husband was going during this time or if they both took a break. I'm not sure, but they had left for a while. And then she went back, and she said in the last couple of years, because they've been going now for a couple of years back to the same church, she said that her husband has had immense growth in his spiritual walk. He's learning to walk in the fruit where he's being kinder and more gentle and more giving and more patient and things of that nature. And I was like, well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. She's like, so I think that this type of church exists as a stepping stone for people like that. And I said, yeah, but it's a shame that you guys, like, you're equally yoked and that you are following Jesus and God, but you're unequally yoked because you're not doing it the same way at the same time. I said, so that must be really hard on you. And she said, yeah, it is. It's kind of trying because I don't necessarily think that this is what it should be. But at the same time, I do see some good fruits coming from it. And I see his growth in particular.
So she's brought up 3 things now, right? She's went from
4 things.
4 things. The modesty, the big show that's costing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then she's talking about it, the church being dead. Yep,
and that it's sports focused.
And then the focus on the worldly things.
Yep.
I mean, these are her. You're not drawing this stuff out. She's
we're just in conversation,
spilling her guts.
I literally just asked her, like, if you could change something, what would it be? You know, so because it was important to me to get that answer from a congregant member.
Yeah.
Especially since we hadn't had a chance to talk to the pastor yet. So she also said that she was feeling a little down. And so I just asked her if I could pray for her. And so she was like, absolutely. So we sat there in the dark, in the quiet before service started. And I just prayed for her and that God or Yahuwah would continue to open. And I told her, I was like, look, I use the Hebrew name. And she said, Yahweh. And I said, oh, so you know that. I said, we don't really focus on the exact pronunciation. I said, some of us say Yahweh, some of us say Yahuwah, but the importance is that we're trying to use his real name. It's a personal relationship. Yeah. And I said, so if you don't mind, I'm going to use the Hebrew name. She's like, that's fine. So I said, Yahuwah, will you, kind of got, and I just went through a prayer and about continuing to open her eyes, because he's opened her eyes at least a little bit.
She hears the door knocking.
Yes. To see that. And I just asked for him to continue to guide her and to continue to show her and to open other people's eyes that the church is spiritually dead as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that the only way to fix that is to seek back into covenant. And then when the prayer was over, I asked her about Shabbat, if she did Sabbath at all. And she said, "Is that on Saturdays?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, we don't do that." And I said, "Okay, well, it's the fourth commandment. Like, I'm not being condescending. I'm just trying to explain it." And I was like, "It's the fourth commandment, and it's really, really important." It says it's, I didn't tell her this part because it wasn't part of the conversation, but it is part of the sign and seal that we get of Yahuwah, the mark of Yahuwah versus the mark of the beast. So I wanted to I wanted to bring that up, but I did bring up to her about the law of blessing, law of curse, and I briefly explained that to her. I said, most of these churches focus on Paul's teachings, but in Acts 23, I believe it is, Paul says that he teaches from Moses' law, the Torah, and also from the prophets. And I said, all that Paul is talking about is how we are blessed when we follow the law of blessing, and that the curse is, yes, there are earthly curses, but the big curse is going to hell for not following the commandments. Yeah. And she was just like, "Wow, that's really deep." And I was like, it is really deep, and
Paul was really
so
deep.
I gave her, yeah. So I gave her, I said, if you want to talk to your husband about it, then here's my husband's number, here's my number, here's our email address, here's our website, etc. I said, I would really encourage you to look into that. And then her husband came and sat down, and she was very quiet and turned back around, which I don't blame her, because he'd be like, "Who's that weirdo?"
Who's the lady in the do-rag?
So then is the sermon, right?
Gotcha.
But before I talk about the sermon, I'm going to kind of briefly go into how I know the pastor. So before COVID, if I'm even allowed to use that word,
maybe.
I think we are now, as long as we're not talking bad about it.
I think they put out a whole bunch of new shots, but we'll cover that another day.
Anyway, so before the pandemic, we had just come out of the church, and we were studying Torah, and I was writing a book about all of the different lies. It's probably like over 1,000 pages of just research, and so every Sabbath, and this is before I was fully into what Sabbath was,
Sure.
But we would read in the mornings, and then in the afternoons, I would go to a coffee shop, and this pastor happened to come at the same time that I would be there. And just over the course of a few weeks, because I went for months working on this thing.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just like 3 weeks and I'm done. I probably went for 7-8 months.
It was close to a year.
Yeah. And so he would be there at the same time that I would be. One of us would show up before the other one, but we're always there. So it just got to a point where we're like, "Hey, you want to sit at my table and save room for everybody else?" And we would have some really in-depth conversations. And
he was preparing his sermons.
Yes.
Right.
Excuse me. So I was there working on a book, basically countering what he's teaching, essentially. Right. And so when he found that out, we just had some really in-depth conversations. And it's a little embarrassing, but I didn't have all the knowledge that I have now because it's been 7 years.
That's not embarrassing.
And it is to me, but he would ask me questions on things that I would try and, I don't want to say try and pin him on something. And he would ask kind of a skirty question that I didn't quite know how to answer. And so when I would discover these things, I'd write them down. And during the pandemic, I actually wrote him and his wife a letter. And I never was able to give it to him because everything was closed and I didn't want to go anywhere. And I didn't feel like going to the church, and the coffee shop we had gone to was closed. So I couldn't see him, there to give it to him. And I didn't want to be like a stalker and find out where he lives and stick it in his mailbox or something, So I just held on to it, and
Jen.
I've lost it now, but all the thoughts are still there because I have answers to those gritty questions now. So I was really hoping he was going to be the pastor that gave this message, and he was. Because, sometimes they have substitutes if they're on vacation or something.
He was there that day.
Yes. And I will say some of the things at the coffee shop that he told me when we were talking about things. We got on the subject of pagan holidays, and he absolutely agreed at that point. I don't know if he does anymore, because again, I haven't spoken to him, but at that point, he agreed that Christmas and Easter were definitely pagan holidays,
I remember you telling me this.
Definitely did not practice them inside of his house. And I said, well,
which is interesting.
And I said, okay, well then why is it that you allow that at your church?
Yeah.
Like, if you're supposed to be the leader,
he's a flock guy.
You know that it's wrong. You may not be the head guy over the pyramid, but you're in the pyramid and you're a head guy over your own thing.
You're the governor.
And so I was like, why is it that you allow this in your church, that you're supposed to be pastoring? And he basically said, well, I've seen tons of people saved on Easter Sundays and at Christmas time, because a lot of people only come on Christmas and Easter. And if it takes that to get them to the church to a point where they get saved, and I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist when I get to heaven, then I'll take my slap on the wrist. And so that was slightly appalling. And then I asked him about tithing, and I said, if the Old Testament doesn't apply, then why do you still have the tithe?
Fair question.
And he said, well, it's not the entirety of the Old Testament that doesn't apply. And if you're not tithing, then where are you storing things? Like, where's your storehouse? The church is the storehouse.
That's the word you told me about, yeah.
And I didn't have an answer. Of course, you only have to read Matthew to figure it out. Yahusha said to store up your treasures in heaven, but I didn't have that as a comeback at that point,
Sure.
So I was just like, that's an interesting question. I'll have to think about that, because I had no idea at that point. And he also said that he didn't believe that the Sabbath applied anymore, the fourth commandment.
Right.
The Sabbath is now in Yahusha. We rest in him. So any day it could be the Sabbath. So I really wanted to talk to him. And then so that's just
you want to talk to the pastor.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to the pastor. So going in, I hear the sermon. It is full of sports analogies.
Just like she said.
It's literally every analogy is a sports analogy except for one. But I really didn't have much that I disagreed with in the sermon. And why do you keep looking at me like that?
You keep beating on the table.
I'm
just
sorry.
keep doing it.
I can't help it.
She's like,
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I talk with my hands. I apologize. Anyway, to get on with the story, I really didn't have a lot that I disagreed with in the entirety of his sermon. I felt he pulled a couple of verses out of context, but I can see where he was coming from with them.
You could see the case he was building.
Sure. Yeah. It's not like they were talking about witchcraft and he's talking about, like, getting baptized. You know what I'm saying?
Sure,
so I can see how he got that from that, but I didn't necessarily agree because of the context surrounding the verses.
Fair enough.
Anyway, but there were a couple of things that just stuck out to me. Aside from all the sports analogies. One of them was that he used a blessing of winning the lottery as so gambling to compare to a blessing from Yahuwah. He said basically that there was a guy that he read about that won $16 million, and at the end of the first year having that much money, he had spent $17 million. Because when the guy got the blessing for gambling, that he wasn't prepared for it. And he was saying Yahuwah allows you to go through adversity to prepare you for his blessings. Now, I don't disagree with the second portion of that, but I thought it was a really odd comparison to use gambling that is essentially prohibited in the Bible to illustrate that point about Yahuwah's blessings. I can see where he's coming from. I just didn't agree with the example he gave. And then the other thing is Brad's going to put up on the screen, and we're going to have a listen to about a 20-second clip directly from his sermon, and he posted this online. This is not a recording that I did.
With the thought of that cloud of witnesses. Now, I don't know how it works within the dimension of heaven and earth and all that, but somehow I know that there's pastors and preachers and teachers and family and other people that have gone before me that are watching, witnessing. But even if that isn't the case, I've got plenty of witnesses watching me right now.
He's talking about how he knows that other teachers and past family members and other pastors are looking down on him. There was a point where he mentioned Billy Graham, and how the MMC, the mini mega church, is like a pyramid, and it started with one big location, and then they've branched off to several other locations. And the lead pastor over all the different locations got to meet with Billy Graham before he passed and pray with him and things of that nature. And he's saying that like he basically it was that, and then he brought up past family members, past other pastors, etc. So it felt like he was saying Billy Graham was watching him. But regardless, I respect the fact that he was humble enough to say that he didn't know for sure. But it seems like a mislead, because he's like, I think I know that this is what's going on. I'm pretty sure that these guys are watching me. But even if they're not, I have all of you as my witnesses for me being up here and teaching you about the Word of God. Sure. And so it was really humble to say he didn't know. But at the same time, knowing that part is where our hope is, because it's part of our salvation. And, we have a video about the death walk, but I know that he hasn't read the apocryphal books necessarily. At least when I had spoken to him several years ago, and it seems still he hasn't read the apocryphal books. So he's going by the 66.
Well, he definitely doesn't. If he has read the apocryphal, he doesn't hold those
as scripture. Right.
Or he would have said, this is what I believe because this is what this says.
Exactly. So either way, but you don't have to have the apocryphal books to prove what happens after death. And we prove that in the video.
Yeah. And
if you want to put it up on the screen.
I'll pop it up on the screen. We'll watch a little small piece of that video just explaining exactly that. When will you bring justice?
Yeah.
Vengeance. Let's do it. Okay, real quick, and we're going to explain something. There's another book. We started with the New Testament. We kind of ran through some of the Old Testament because we know people dig into the New Testament and try to grab Paul first, and we grabbed Paul just for y'all. And now we've moved into the kind of the Old Testament. But we're also going to grab Second Esdras, book of 4 Ezra. This is a book that not everybody accepts as canon. Doesn't really matter. I haven't found anything in it that goes against anything in the canon or the Torah.
Well, the canon was made by men.
Well,
not by
yeah, we can get into that another time. But this is
what people call an apocryphal book.
It is. It's an apocryphal book, according to man. I believe that it is inspired. Personally, if you haven't had a chance to read it, you should. If I have found favor in your sight, O Yahuwah, show this also to your servant, whether after death, as soon as every one of us yields up his ruach or soul, we shall be kept in the rest until those times come when you will renew the creation, or whether we shall be tormented at once. And he's asking a question. He answered me and said, I will show you that also, but do not be associated with those who have shown scorn, nor number yourselves among those who are tormented. For you have a treasure of works laid up with El Elyon, but it will not be shown to you until the last times. Now, concerning death, the teaching is, when the decisive decree has gone forth from Yahuwah that a man shall die, as the ruach leaves the body to return again to him who gave it. First of all, it adores the glory of El Elyon. And if it is one of those who have shown scorn and have not guarded the way of Yahuwah, and who have despised his Torah, and who have hated those who fear Elohim, such Ruachoth or spirits shall not enter into habitations, but shall immediately wander about in torments, ever grieving and sad in 7 ways.
So you don't have to have the apocryphal books to
Right.
explain what happens after death. You just have to read the Bible. And so he's supposed to be a teacher. And teachers need to be humble and they need to admit when they don't know something, but they also need to search for that answer so they can give their congregation, their sheep, they're the shepherds,
Yeah.
right? There's one good shepherd, but there are other shepherds, right? And so as the shepherd, you need to come back to your sheep and you need to be able to explain that to them.
Yeah. What
So
if that was
again-
a question, right?
Yeah. So like, I think he is a nice guy. I think he would give you the shirt off his back. I think he would pull over if your car's broken down and either wait with you until the tow company got there or help you change your tire. I think he's that kind of a guy. I really don't get anything bad from him. I think he's trying. That's on a human level. On a spiritual level, it's a shame that he is okay with just getting a slap on the wrist as far as pagan holidays are concerned.
That's his beliefs.
I know. And that's not biblical.
Right.
And so there's an unbiblical teacher, nice guy, but unbiblical and unsound doctrine and not firm. Now, you have to be firm. You have to be open to learning new things and admitting if you're mistaken on something. But you have to be firm in what you're teaching to other people.
That's right.
And so
Well,
they're not getting that.
By his words of what
His
when
own
you asked,
words.
his own words, he's like, hey,
I don't
you know,
all that.
I'm not real sure about this, but also back when you had spoke to him and asked him about these things, he was clearly able to see the wrong in doing the pagan stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he wouldn't
he's tell his
okay
congregants.
to go in, and I think I remember his excuse for that was, well, you know, I got to bring people into the church.
Yes. So that was also part of the conversation. He said that he was okay with it because it brought people in, and he has to show spiritual growth in the church. And
That's the words he
only
used.
way, and I asked him, I was like, you mean monetary growth? And he said, well, the only way to show spiritual growth is if people join the church and the money increases. That's literally the only way. And I'm like, it's not, you can take attendance, I mean, I know there's 200 people, but you can have your door greeters be like, that's the whole point. You have deacons and you have these teams of people to get to know people. Okay. So we saw Lucy and we saw Kevin and we saw Mark and we saw
Or
the 17 kids.
Just count the times how many people raised their hands in the dark. That was their thing.
Sure.
Raise your hand if you believe
I wasn't
today.
quite getting to that, but
Oh, is
Yeah.
that coming? Okay.
yeah, it's literally the next thing. But just to continue on, so basically he was saying that if he didn't show spiritual growth in the church, he would lose his job. And so I said, so if you're not making money, you lose your job. And he was like, I mean, if that's how you want to look at it. So he didn't deny it.
Well, I mean, at least he's honest about that.
Absolutely.
He's like, hey, I don't believe this stuff is accurate, but I'm going to teach it anyways because I really need a job.
Pretty much. And that was concerning back then.
Yeah, I remember
And-
talking to you about it.
Yeah.
We went and
Well, because I had been talking to this guy for almost a year.
Yeah, we
So
had
every time
in-depth
we would have a
conversation.
conversation and
Yeah.
he'd say something sideways, I would talk to you about it. I'd be like,
Like,
hey, man,
whoa.
I didn't quite know how to handle this, or this is what I said, or he didn't have an answer for this, or I didn't have an answer for that, or whatever. And, it was really good, though, because we were able to have those discussions without getting heated,
Sure.
without any, I don't want to say confrontation, because there's always confrontation and conflicting viewpoints, but without any like argumentativeness, any like what people would consider debating. It was literally just discussions, questions, and answers. It was actually, that's why I'm saying he's a really nice guy. I don't think he means to harm people, and I certainly don't think he's trying to put people in hell, unfortunately, because he's not firm and sound in the doctrine. That's unfortunately what's happening.
And nowadays, you'd let the sword eat. You know what I'm saying? Like we were talking today in our studies.
Yeah.
You just let the sword do its job.
Yeah. Now
split.
that I know more and I'm more
Yeah.
learned and studied, like I said, it's been like 7 years since I've seen this guy. But anyway, so I didn't really find anything other than those two things really particularly wrong with his sermon. And so, after it was over, I quietly gathered my things. Oh no, let me go back. After the actual sermon was over, he went up. Well, he was already up, but he called for the lights to turn out, and the little soft music started playing in the
Yeah, the
background.
candles start lighting
He
in
did
the
his
corners.
closing.
Get low.
Okay, he did his little. Let's everybody be quiet.
The emotion.
Nobody leave because, it could be a distraction
Oh,
for
yeah.
people. Let's set the mood. Basically, he's talking real soft, and he's like, if you feel that you need to be closer with God or you need Jesus, and I want you to raise your hand. Everybody bow your heads, eyes closed. And I saw several people in the audience, because I didn't bow my head and close my eyes, and I didn't feel it was disrespectful because it's dark and no one could see me, and I'm in the back. But I didn't bow my head, and there were several people that did raise their hands in their seats. But it's a stark contrast to how it was in the New Testament. It was like these people were street preaching. They were going into the synagogues. They were kind of causing a ruckus, if you will.
Yeah.
And people were flocking to them. They didn't care who was around them, etc. They wanted to know. They wanted to find Yahuwah. They wanted to find Yahusha. They wanted to learn.
Amen.
And it's a stark contrast to nowadays in the church. Lights are off. You don't have to do a public profession. And he prayed over the church, and then he prayed over the people that had raised their hands. And then he asked the people that raised their hands to say the sinner's prayer. And it wasn't just like a normal sinner's prayer. It was a pretty elaborate sinner's prayer. I think I clocked it because I recorded it. I think I clocked it at like 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Like, it was a really long sinner's prayer. And
that's devotion.
Yeah. And then he apologized to everybody when that was over, and he was like, "Look, I'm sorry that I carried on a little bit longer today, but I feel like this is worth 10 extra minutes of your time. The restaurants will still be there when we close, and etc." Which is true. And then he welcomed the people. He's like, if you said that prayer and you want us to know you said that prayer, then you can come up with our prayer team, or you can fill out one of the visitor cards and tell us on those, a communication card, and drop it in the offering. We're going to praise God in one more way and take the offering during the closing song or whatever. And so they were passing the offering buckets around, and when the guy was just I was still taking notes and gathering my stuff, and I realized there was a person standing right here, when you can feel someone's eyes on you.
Yeah.
So I just looked up at the guy, and he's just holding the bucket.
These guys shaking.
And I was like, so I just leaned out of the way. I was like, and pointed to the lady next to me, so she got up and reached over me, because I was like, I'm not doing that. Sorry,
Interesting.
And I'm not saying it's wrong to take offerings and stuff, but because these people are following a false gospel, I don't want to be a part of taking an offering for that. It'd be like me going to a Muslim what do they call those? Mosque.
Yeah.
A Muslim mosque, and taking up an offering in there. There's nothing inherently wrong with someone taking an offering for Yahuwah, but if it's not serving him,
if it's
then
for
I'm not.
Yahuwah, sure.
Right. So it's over. I packed my stuff up. At this point is when I handed the lady the piece of paper with all of her information. I was like, just stick this in your Bible for later. And I left, right? And her husband was like, who's that? And so I went out into the foyer, and the little old lady that was there before that handed me the booklet was still there. And she's like, it was so nice to meet you, Jennifer. And I was like, oh, remembered my name. It's
been 45 minutes, you
right?
still know me.
Hey, man, that's good for me. I have a bad memory. But anyway.
Good for her.
So then I was looking, because normally the pastors, I almost said his name, normally the pastors at these churches will exit at the back of the stage.
Sure.
And he didn't. He came out into the foyer, and I was like, ooh, is this my chance to talk to him? I wasn't really feeling like I needed to talk to him. This is more just a personal want at this point. I felt like I was there for that lady that I talked to initially.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But at this point, it's just a me. I want to talk to him. So I was like, ooh, am I going to go talk to him? And then that lady came out. And she was like, hey, so what did you think of the sermon? And I was like, it was about what I expected. And she was like, the same as last time? And I said, basically, nothing really has changed, unfortunately, because he would get right up to the point. Like, he would tell people, you need to follow God. You need to give him your heart. You need to follow them. And he even used a verse in Judges, and I forget what it is now, but he used a verse in Judges. And he said, that he told the Israelites to follow him, and then when they did, they got blessings. But in that verse in Judges, it says that he told them to follow his commandments, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would get right up to that, and he would never say it. And I told her that. I was like, he would get right up to telling them the truth, and then he wouldn't tell them the truth. He's
scared.
And I was like, he wouldn't tell them to follow the commandments, even though that's literally one of the verses he pulled out. I was like, so unfortunately, it's just like it was, and there's nothing really changed here. And she was like, yeah, I know what you're saying. And I invited her again to our Shabbat. I said, you can come online or you can come to our home. I said, we always do online first, so we can kind of fill you out or whatever. And so it's not overwhelming, because our group is really welcoming. It's particularly the older ones in the group, and they kind of overwhelm people sometimes. So I was like, you can come online. And understandably, she doesn't want to do that without her husband. And I understand that. And I said, I'm not pushing you to do that without your husband. I said, maybe it's not this week. Maybe it's not next week. Maybe it's not even next month. Maybe it's next year. I said, but at some point you should talk to him about the Sabbath. And you should talk to him about how you're feeling in the church. Because it's not fruitful for you to feel one way and for him to feel another way. And you guys really need to
that's
work
good
on
advice.
that,
I think you did well advising that situation.
Yeah, because I'm trying to get her out. But I'm not trying to get her out without her husband, because they are equal. They're one flesh.
Yeah.
Be like ripping yourself in half, and that's not going to happen.
It's not gonna
so she was like,
fruitful.
okay, I'll think about it, and I was like, good. Anyway, so our brief talk was over, and I was like, well, you have a good rest of your day. And she's like, yeah, you too. And I leave, and I go out of the door, and while I was talking to her, I saw the pastor going back and forth like 14 times. And every time I kept like glancing over at him or whatever. And I was just like, well, I guess this isn't the day I get to talk to him. So I left, and I went about, 15 feet out of the door. And that's when I felt like just to stop, go back in. And that wasn't me. Go back in and talk. Cool. So I'm like, all right. And I did an about face, and I'm sure, again, everybody's looking at me weird. But I like literally stopped and did an about face and walked back into the church. And he was right there. I mean, like within 10 feet of the door. And I was like, awesome. And he was talking to somebody. So I was waiting really close to the door, staring at him. And I guess he got the feels of me staring. And he stopped his conversation really abruptly and turned around and looked at me. And I was like, hey, And he just stopped the conversation, didn't even say bye, just turned around and beelined toward me. And I was like, oh, I wasn't trying to interrupt your conversation. He's like, it's fine. And he shook my hand. He's like, hey, how are you? And I was like, do you remember me? And he was like, yeah, from coffee. And I was like, yes.
Coffee lady.
Do you remember me? And he was so friendly. He's so nice. You can't help but like the guy. And, sorry, I'm doing it again. Keep giving me weird looks. But he, anyway, we were talking, and I said, he said, how have you been? I said, I've been okay. How are you? Just chit chat for a second. And I was like, hey, so is there a way I can get a hold of you where my husband and I can talk to you? And he said, yeah. And he was digging through his little bag, and he's like, oh, I don't have any business cards on me. I said, well, is your information on the website? And he's like, no. And I said, well, I have a pen. So he's like, okay. So he gave me his email address so Brad and I can email him and set up an appointment to talk to him. Fun fact, I still haven't heard from the pastor of the other church. He still hasn't contacted me. It's been a few weeks now.
Makes sense. He's busy, Jen.
I think he's more angry than busy. But anyway, so this pastor, he's just a nice guy. And so he was just like, here's my information. And he's like, oh, but don't have, he's like, I'm free pretty much any day of the week except Mondays, because Mondays are my Sabbath. And
so he remembered that and then brought that up. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay. So
and he remembers the conversations too.
And I was gonna say something, and then I was like, you know what? I just felt, no, like, this is not the time, this is not the place. Just email him and set up an appointment. So Brad and I are going to be doing that very soon, and we hope to be able to audio record, if not video record.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
With him, so we can have hopefully a fruitful discussion. Like I said, he was very patient when we were talking. He was really kind. It wasn't an argument. He didn't get angry. It was just a discussion on differences in faith and what the scripture actually says. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that that's how our little interview thing goes. I'm hoping that
that'd be good if that were the case.
I'm hoping that, because he said something also in his sermon about how we need to really, I don't know verbatim, but it was basically like we need to have people in our lives that are willing to basically check us if we're doing something wrong. And so I'm hoping that he follows through on his sermon, on what he said, and I'm hoping that we can help him check some things, so that way he can go back to his congregation and be like, and be that humble person that he showed himself to be in the clip.
Hopefully we can convince him to take another look at things. That's the key here, because he's obviously knowledgeable.
Sure.
He's biblically sound, at least in the way that a preacher would be in the Christian church today.
Yeah.
He sees the hypocrisy and the bad.
Yeah.
He just chooses to do nothing about it. And
right.
I think
part of that is because he has children at home. He's scared to lose his job.
Hey, he's the
scared
provider.
to be without.
I get
yeah.
It.
I
feel the pain.
I think that's really a big thing.
Mm-hmm. It's a big thing for most.
And I think he's convinced himself that even though he knows it's wrong deep down, that he's just going to get a slap on the wrist because he was at least trying to do it within the scope of what his job allows.
Sure.
And that was one thing that the woman said. She was like, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think he's trying without being able to tell the whole thing. I think he's trying, because he does say things like, you guys need to quit watching TV shows that even have any curse words in it, much less any sexual scenes.
I agree with that.
And I'm like, well, that's great, but that's still not telling the people to follow the commandments.
Right.
So
that's just scratching the surface of morals.
Which is all that he's really allowed to do, unfortunately, in the position, because that's what draws people in. People don't want to feel judged. They don't want to feel condemned. And again, we shouldn't condemn them. And in a way, we shouldn't judge them any more than we would judge ourselves. But we have to judge ourselves based off of what Yahuwah the Father wants for us, which is why the Torah is a mirror to us. It helps us look in the mirror and see where we have something wrong. Something's unkept.
Righteous.
But anyway, so that's our plan going forward, is to talk to this pastor, and hopefully he'll be just as kind and just as okay with an actual discussion as he used to be. And I think it'll help with Brad being there. We can kind of fill in each other's gaps, and because we're not pastors, that are supposed to have all the answers.
We're just ordinary people with a lot of questions.
Right. So hopefully it goes well, and hopefully, again, if he does rethink things and relook at things, hopefully he keeps that really humble attitude of, hey, I don't know everything, and hey, I thought I knew this, but I was wrong. And hopefully it gives him some kind of conviction to bring that before the congregation, regardless of what it costs him.
Maybe
because Yahushua said, lay down your life and follow him.
Yeah, and maybe we can get through to him, plant a seed enough to where he gets instructions from the Father in the future, and then he ends up putting out the truth, and maybe he gets fired for it.
Yeah,
I'll support him. Like, I'll go out of my way to support that man if he decides to do that.
You should tell him that in our meeting.
I would. I would literally help him in any way I could if he decided to tell the truth, use the platform, tell the people the truth, and if you get fired for it, man,
you're tapping the table now.
You get fired for it, I've got your back. It's...
Yeah. Well, I had asked him also when we were doing coffee. I said, well, what about the Passover? And he said, I would love to do the Passover with my congregation. I think it's so important. He was like, because that's what the Last Supper was. He was eating Passover, and I would love to do that. And I said, so why don't you? And he said, well, it's just a lot to organize. I said, if I pay for it.
I remember this, yeah.
Like, I went out on a limb because, like, Brad and I did not have the money for that then. Not that we have the money to feed 200 people lamb now, but
Amen.
By ourselves. But we figure it out. You know?
willing.
Right. He creates a way.
Yeah, he'd figure it out for us. We wouldn't have to do anything.
But I was like, what if I organized it? What if I brought in all the tables we would need? What if I brought in all the chairs we would need? What if I paid for all the lamb and all the wine and made all the bread myself? What if I did all of that for your whole congregation? And he said, I don't think that would work.
Yeah, he's hesitant. I mean, I get it.
No, I think he knows it wouldn't work because it's not something these pastors, just to give a little background to the pyramid. These pastors, the main pastor comes up with a theme. Right. And he sends the theme out to these pastors and says, make your sermon around these. Mm-hmm. Or if they have their own ideas, they have to get it approved through the hierarchy pastors. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing as far as getting things approved. Sure. Because you want to be sure you're scripturally sound and they're supposed to be elders to you, right? But as far as make your sermon on this, nobody told Peter what to make his sermons on.
Yahusha.
Nobody told Paul what to make his sermons on. You know, well, obviously Yahusha. I'm just saying, like, they taught from the Torah, they taught from the prophets, and they taught from Yahusha's words. That's what they taught from, you know, but nobody was like, hey, talk about the parable of the figs this week, which they don't even really talk about that in these churches. They bring like what they consider real life circumstances, like sports leagues and what's going on your kids' sports
jokes
teams and stuff.
Everything. But to that point, you're making a very good point to bring up to pastors in these conversations.
Yeah.
Well, what were the original preachers, as you like guys, pastors? Yeah. What were the apostles preaching, and where were they drawing from their information?
Exactly.
It was the Tanakh, and it was Yahusha's clarification on the Tanakh. That's it. Yep. That's what they preached about. There was nothing extra. Did they have conversations? I'm sure.
Sure.
But they always would have drawn it back to the Father's will.
Exactly.
The Father's will. This is what we're going to do. This is I mean, that's actually a really great parallel that we should draw. You know, instead of football concerts, bowing your head in a dark room in prayer, turn the lights down, play the music lightly. Instead of all that, why don't we just tell them the truth? And whoever doesn't want to hear it or can't hear it, move on.
Right.
Pray for those people and move on.
Yep.
And then tell the next person the truth, and then move to the next person.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like he got right up to that precipice, but wouldn't cross that threshold.
Yeah.
And it was sad, because I had a lot of hope that.
You thought he might have changed?
I did. I was hoping.
He was still pastoring the same church. So
I understand that,
he had a job
I thought
still.
Maybe like he might squeeze it in here or there, if that makes sense. You know, where he says the truth. Not enough where he'll get fired, but enough that he's drawing some people out.
Fair enough.
You know, into what he already knows are pagan traditions and stuff.
Right.
But again, hopefully, those were our closing comments, by the way. We just kind of went on a tangent. But
no, that's okay. We'll actually, if we end up having that conversation,
we'll make another video.
Regardless if we are able to get audio or video, we will make a video and we'll write down the notes and we'll talk about them, and we'll try to be as straightforward with the conversation of what was said and how it was said. And
like I said, this guy is super nice. I'm not unrealistic, but I'm really hopeful.
Sure.
You know, it's not like he gets angry and just shuts you down. Like, he actually takes time to listen. So I'm like super hopeful for this guy.
We'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it.
Signing off.
See you next time.
Shalom.
1, 2, 3, 4. Prepare the way. All these people make straight a path. For Yeshua's coming back, so we lift up as the mighty eagles. prepare the